Good evening, Christ Church, and plus other friends. It's Thursday night, and here we are. I'm going to adjust my phone just a little bit, and Becky's going to be checking to make sure that I'm not supposed to be tilted 90 degrees. Last week, for some reason, I got a message that says tilt your phone 90 degrees, and I had to. It wouldn't fit on my little holder for my phone anymore after I did that. So hopefully we're not going to run into that tonight. I see a bunch of people joining us already, and so I'm going to get into the commercial part of this, and then we'll start our lesson. Some great things are going to be going on coming up this month of August at Christ Church. August 14th. I should have a drum roll here. We're back to having coffee and donuts. Maybe I should say donut holes, but we've had to give those up for COVID, and we're restarting those. We used to have communion in the chapel starting at 10:45 every Sunday morning, so people could come out of the 9:30 service, go to communion. People coming to the 11 o'clock service, now 11:15, could come early. Well, we're starting communion again in the chapel, 10:45, and looking forward to that. Nathan will be serving that for the first time in a long time on August 14th. Each of the pastors will be in a rotation, so you can get communion any Sunday you want it. August 17th is a Wednesday, and Community Cafe restarts. And this time we're going to do it indoors. We'll be serving dinner in the commons, and we're going to have red and white checkered tablecloths. We're going to make it look like a cafe, and we're going to have some radio ads that'll go out in the community inviting people to come for a free dinner, and hopefully we'll have a lot of guests who come to be with us. All right, Becky just said no, I don't. There's Becky. She's just saying I don't need to be tilted 90 degrees. I'm always a little twisted, but I think I'm oriented correctly here at least. And August 14th, 21st, and 28th, we're going to have some awfully good, I should say, awesome worship services. And it's going to be kind of a building fund campaign. Just to give you you've already gotten a letter about this probably, and you'll be getting another letter. Let's see, it's going out, I think, tomorrow. With lots more information about it, but this is a 1-year campaign because we're going to pay that debt off. If things keep going as well as they're going, we're going to get it paid off. And so this campaign is to tell you about how we will do that, and we're going to be showing a couple of really good videos. I saw the first video this week, and it's really informative. And then I helped Randy video the second one. We did that yesterday and today, and I think you'll find that entertaining and hopefully informative as well. It's so good to think about paying off our debt and being able to use that $26,000 a month that we've been paying on that loan to use that for ministry and doing other things to reach more people for Christ. So this is an exciting time. August is going to be a huge month. All right, let's get into let's do a quick review of last week. It was Matthew 26b. We did the second half of Matthew 26. In that we saw Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. We saw his betrayal by Judas, his arrest, kind of a preliminary hearing at night, and Peter's denial. Let's go to the garden again. Jesus prayed for 2 things in the garden. What were those 2 things? Just post your comments. And if you're not really fast with your comments, Becky's going to answer the question here. She did that a couple of times last week.
I'll refrain.
Did you hear that? She said, I'll refrain. So I have to be patient because it takes a little while for you to hear my voice. The miracle of 5G and how quickly we get things online over through technology, but still there's a little bit of a delay. So sometimes I sort of sit and wait to see those comments coming. But when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he basically prayed for 2 things. post on here what it is that Jesus was praying for in the garden. Uh, Take this cup from me, and it's your will. Thank you. Those are the two. Take this cup from me was kind of the human side of Jesus. I don't want to die. I don't want to die on a cross, especially. Take this cup from me, and then resigned himself to following his Father's will. That, to me, is the more divine side of Jesus, because it's almost, I guess it's humanly possible to submit that way to God, but it's an awesome, awesome witness to us. As soon as the armed group came, and Jesus woke them up and says, come, I want you to see this. This armed group came to arrest him, and when they did, what did all the apostles do? Well, first, Peter whips out a sword and cuts off the ear of a servant. Judas betrayed him. But then Jesus is arrested, and he chastises Peter for using his sword. Put that away. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But what did the apostles do when Jesus is arrested and taken away? This is something that he had, I started to say prophesied. Yeah, it's a prophecy. He had predicted it. He had told him it would happen. Peter had said, not me. And Peter is a bit different than the other apostles. They all fled. Exactly right. They ran. They scattered. Thank you. They're afraid. They ran and they hid. If I had been among those 11, I probably would have run and hidden as well. They're thinking about their own safety. Peter was a little different in that Peter followed along behind. He went to the chief priest, or the high priest's house, Caiaphas' house, and was there. There was this hearing before the Sanhedrin. And this is a very respected, orderly, dignified group of people, 71 elders. They're almost like the three branches of government. And they broke some of their rules that night to hear the charges against Jesus and to try to come up with charges against him. They had trouble getting witnesses to say the same thing. They put Jesus under oath and asked him if he was the Messiah, the Christ. That broke their rules. You were never supposed to ask anyone to incriminate themselves, but they did. And Jesus responded, it is as you say. In other words, yeah, I'm the Messiah. I'm the promised one. Then what did they do? Whenever Jesus says, I'm the one, it is as you say, what did they do? Now here's this very orderly, dignified group of men, and they break down. They break their decorum. What are some of the things they do to Jesus? It would be like our Supreme Court having someone admit guilt and then doing this. You better hurry with those responses, because Becky's gonna yell out with some of the answers here if you're not careful.
Biting the tongue.
You hear that? She's over here biting her tongue. She must have an answer or two. Oh yes, Christy says they tore their clothes. When someone in the Jewish tradition heard, thank you, Nikki, yes, tore their clothes. When they hear blasphemy, they tear their clothes. They're in grieving. It's their way of saying, I can't hear that. I can't stand it. They spat on him, showing disgust. They beat him. It says they slapped him. This was a horrible mob scene that they turned into. They declared him guilty of blasphemy. So now that's their charge, but they'll have to come up with something else when they get in front of the Romans. Out in the courtyard, in the meantime, Peter is being spotted. People hear his Galilean accent, and they ask, aren't you one of the followers of this Christ, this Messiah? And so 3 times he denies him. We talked about how Peter was so remorseful. You know, he wept. That's where that verse, Peter wept, comes from. and he would be forgiven. Judas hanged himself. That was the major difference between Peter's response to his guilt and Judas's response to his own guilt. Okay, Becky, we're at 27. Why don't you read the first two verses? Matthew 27, 1 and 2.
Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor.
Okay, now this is their version of what we call today the perp walk. You see on TV oftentimes where somebody's been arrested, they oftentimes are in handcuffs, or they'll have their coat up, covering up their face. You don't want to be seen that way. Jesus is now being seen by the people as someone that their Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, has declared him guilty of blasphemy. And they parade him in front of the people. Some of these people are going to follow them to Pontius Pilate's court. He's bound, he's beaten, he's been sentenced to death by the leaders. As people would ask, I'm sure along the way, what did he do? Then they're going to be saying he's guilty of blasphemy. Now, answer this for me, if you would, please. Why do they take him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor? They have declared Jesus guilty of blasphemy. Blasphemy meaning he's claimed to be God. That's punishable by stoning in the Jewish tradition. In fact, you could look back at the book of Exodus, and there's something in there about how to stone someone for this sin. But yet, instead of taking him out and stoning him, they take him to Pontius Pilate. And there's just a pragmatic rule why they do that. And by the way, it was at about this time that Judas feels remorse. He goes and commits suicide. Okay, Christy says because the Jews can't kill without Roman approval. Yes, the Romans had taken away the Jewish people's ability to, thank you, Greg, they're an occupied country, and when they occupied them, they took away the Jewish people's right of capital punishment. So they can't execute people anymore. Now, if you read over in the book of Acts, you're going to see Stephen stoned to death by the Jewish leaders. They were in a mob. They turned into a frenzy. They forgot that they no longer had the right of capital punishment, and so they broke the law. But only the Romans can sentence someone to death and execute someone. And so they've got to take him to Pontius Pilate and get him convicted of something that Pontius Pilate, the Romans, would see as capital offense. If he'd been a Roman citizen and they had him convicted, then he would have been executed by beheading. That's the way we think that the Apostle Paul was executed, because he was a Roman citizen. But when you're not a citizen, the Romans reserved this very cruel method they learned from the Persians of crucifixion. And so that is what awaits Jesus, not a citizen of the Roman Empire. Okay, Becky, take a good deep breath. You're going to be reading 11 through 18, please. And as she reads, Matthew's not going to tell us what the charges are. They take him to Pontius Pilate, they accuse him, but he doesn't tell us, I don't believe, what they accuse him of. So pop up on the screen, if you would, what it is or was that they accused Jesus of before Pontius Pilate that will get him convicted, executed. Okay, Becky.
Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply. not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him.
Okay. Do you remember the charges that the leaders brought before Pontius Pilate? You know, if they say he's guilty of blasphemy, you know, Pontius Pilate's going to say, "I could care less. That's your tradition. It's your rule. It's your God. We won't execute him because you disagree with him over whether he's your God or not. That won't get him convicted." But that's not what they charge him with. They had, you can see from what Becky read, they had said this man claims to be King of the Jews. When Pilate says, "Are you in fact King of the Jews?" Well, it's as you said. You said it. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, "Well, you say that I am." In Luke, we're told that they gave some other charges. One is this, that, okay, they said he claims to be the king. We only have one king. It's Caesar. Oh my goodness. Talk about turncoats. These people are saying that Caesar is their one and only king. But they also say that Jesus is leading the people to revolt. That's what Barabbas had done. He really had. Okay, Christy says kingship was Caesar. That will get you executed. Claiming to be the king in competition with Caesar, the emperor, that'll get you convicted according to Roman law. Leading people to revolt against Caesar, that'll get you convicted and executed. Advising the people not to pay taxes to Caesar. What a false charge. Jesus, in fact, had said, remember, render or pay to Caesar that which is Caesar's, render to God that which is God's. And so this was totally false. He did not lead the people to revolt. That was false. Claiming to be the Christ, the Son of God, that was true, but the Romans didn't care about that. Claims to be a king, that was a twisted fact. His kingdom was not of the world, and they knew that. But they're bringing things that will get the Romans to execute him. Whenever all the other charges were brought, these things, and as I say, Matthew doesn't detail them, but saying that people shouldn't pay taxes, leading revolt, Jesus didn't even respond. He didn't honor those with a response. And Caesar is amazed by that. Most of us would be whining and on our knees pleading, saying, "I didn't do that." And Jesus doesn't do that. Dr. William Barclay, in his commentary, makes the point that on this day, in that hearing before Pontius Pilate, it was Jesus who was in control. Pontius Pilate doesn't know what to do. He's a politician, and he doesn't want to convict Jesus, but he's got the crowd after him, so he's torn back and forth. The crowd is out of control, yelling, "Crucify." The chief priests are making up lies. Everybody's out of control except Jesus, and he's very calm. He only answers when he wants to answer. You can see that Pilate thinks Jesus is innocent. And part of what Becky said, Matthew says Pilate could see that it was out of jealousy that they're placing some of these charges, but there was something else. What else was telling Pilate, don't convict this guy. Don't have anything to do with having this guy put to death. What was that? What was this thing that was going on kind of behind the scenes with Pilate? Something else that was saying to Pilate, this man is innocent. Be careful here. Did you pick up on that? It's not in all the Gospels. It is in Matthew. It's this thing about Pilate's wife. She had had a dream the night before. Yes, thank you, Nikki. She'd had a dream the night before, and she couldn't sleep, and then she can't get it out of her mind the next day, and so she sends a messenger down to Pilate's court saying, don't have anything to do with this guy. He's innocent. Don't have anything to do with putting him to death. And so he thinks of something. Pilate, as I say, he's a politician. He had this tradition of releasing a prisoner on Passover. And he thinks, maybe this is one of the ways I can get out of this. And so he says, I've got Barabbas in prison. And it turns out in another gospel, his name was Jesus Barabbas. Do you want us to release Jesus Barabbas or Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus whom you call the Christ? Which one of those? The ironic thing is that Barabbas was guilty of insurrection. He led a revolt. He was guilty of what Jesus was innocent of and charged with. The people shout, crucify him. Pilate is caught on a dilemma here, and sometimes we have trouble understanding, well, my goodness, Pilate was a Roman governor. He didn't need to listen to this crowd of people. Actually, he did. Pilate had gotten into trouble with the Jewish people. Now, keep in mind, he's someone who is sent from Rome to govern this territory that belongs to Rome. They've occupied it. Greg used that word earlier. They're occupied. Pilate's their governor. And Pilate saw that they didn't have a very good water supply system in Jerusalem. And so he said, well, I'll build them a water supply system. We'll build these aquifers. We'll get water into the city. And where will I get the money for this? He wasn't getting the tax revenue that was going to Rome. And he noticed that the temple always had gold and money. And so he literally went to the temple and said, I'm going to take this money from the treasury. And he took that money and he built this wonderful water transport system to get water into the city. And the people, oh my goodness, were they upset. You did not touch the money in the temple. And so they literally went to Rome and filed a formal complaint against their governor. And it was a little bit like Caesar said, I'm going to give you one more chance. So Pontius Pilate kind of had maybe two strikes against him here, and he didn't want the people to be upset with him for not crucifying Jesus and then go to Caesar one more time. Tiberius was the emperor at this time, and he kind of used up all his chances, and so he washed his hands. You notice Matthew says in front of the people, I can just see a bowl of water, basin of water. He's washing his hands. He's drying them, and with that, he's saying, it's like our expression, I'm washing my hands of this problem. That was exactly what he was doing. He was acting that out to say, this isn't on me, it's on you. I'm washing my hands of it. But then he turned Jesus over to be flogged. He was flogged, and then he handed him over to be crucified. Handed him over, meaning he gave him to the army. John tells it that the flogging was done earlier, and that was an attempt on Pilate's part to appease the crowd, hoping that when he came out from the flogging, that the crowd would have pity on him and it would be okay. He wouldn't have to execute him. Matthew doesn't tell it that way. He just tells it like he sent him to be flogged, then he had him turned over to be executed. A flogging was a cruel, cruel beating. Leather strips would have been embedded with bone and stone, bits of metal, and they would have torn the flesh. There would have been a lot of bleeding involved. It wasn't intended to be capital punishment, but sometimes the prisoner would die. It would be fatal. Oftentimes they were in shock when they came out of a flogging. This helps to explain why Jesus' death on the cross was accelerated. He'd lost a lot of blood and was weakened when he was put on the cross. Okay, Becky, let's pick up at verse 27 and read through 31, please.
Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
I can remember as a child thinking this was the cruelest part of the crucifixion. These soldiers doing all these things to him. But that was a mistake. The soldiers' motive is not evil. What they do is evil. It's brutal. It's terrible. What were some of the things the soldiers did to Jesus? They've taken him into the praetorium, which is like a barracks. It says the whole company. So there's a bunch of soldiers who gather around him, and they make sport of him. It's a cruel, cruel thing that they do. What were some of the things that they did? They're basically, they've heard, okay, this guy's been accused. He thinks he's king of the Jews. So that's his crime. He claims to be king of the Jews, rising up against the emperor. And so they make fun of him. Exactly right, Lynn. They find an old scarlet robe. That's the color of royalty. Some gospels say purple. Scarlet and purple were expensive dyes, and so they were only used in the robes and the clothing of royalty. They make a crown of thorns, a brutal way to make fun of him claiming to be a king. They take a staff and they beat him on the head with that. They are making cruel sport or fun of Jesus. When they've finished with their motive, let's talk a little bit about that. A soldier serving in the Roman army in Palestine would have been very, very on edge. There were a lot of terrorists who would like to kill Roman soldiers, and they had to be watching out over their shoulder all the time. Now they're in the Passover. There are thousands and thousands of Jewish people there, and there are hundreds of Roman soldiers. They're way outnumbered. And so it's kind of like they take out their fear, the anxiety, humiliation and torture. They're making an example of Jesus for the crowd, as Greg says. I'm reminded sometimes when I read this, and maybe it's not a good comparison, but our soldiers in Iraq, if you remember, went totally out of control at the Abu Ghraib prison. They did things to prisoners they should not have done. And part of that was more than likely they're frustrated. They're away from home. They're probably down deep. They're afraid. They've lost loved ones, comrades, to terrorists and people who have are friends of the people there in prison, and so they take it out on them, and it gets out of control. I think that's a little bit like these Roman soldiers were doing. I'm not trying to dismiss what they did. It was cruel, but it wasn't like the Jewish leaders who had plotted and had lied and had brought this about through evil motives. These soldiers, they were having brutal, cruel fun at the expense of Jesus. Okay, Becky, let's go to verse 32, and if you would, this is a big chunk, but read 32 through 40. This is We're going to the crucifixion here.
As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God."
Okay, Jesus would have been redressed in his clothing, taken out, and right away they can see that he's in no condition to carry the cross. And so they draft Simon of Cyrene to do that for him. The detachment, a crucifixion detachment, typically had 5 soldiers. One soldier walked in front of the prisoner, one walked behind, and he had a spear and would, if the prisoner lagged or tried to back up, he would be stuck with the spear. There would have been one on either side. So there was no, you're surrounded. You've got to keep moving forward. And then one soldier would be way out in front, and that would probably have been the centurion who was responsible for the party. And he carried a sign, and it would have said insurrection or for refusal to pay taxes or whatever the person was being executed for. Jesus' sign said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. In other words, this person is being taken to the cross because he claims to be the King of the Jews. And the purpose for that sign was deterrent. It was a way to say to the people along the way to the cross, if you do this, this is what will happen to you. The Romans were brutal, but they meant business. They would have taken a winding way to the cross. If you go to Jerusalem today, there's something called the Via Dolorosa. Via Dolorosa. It's the way of agony or the way of tears. It's the way, the journey to the cross. And we don't know exactly what streets he went up and down, but for years and years and years, we've had these posts, these signs that tell us here's where Jesus fell. Here's where Simon was told to pick up the cross. Here's where Matthew doesn't tell us, but widows offered him a drink along the way. Jesus spoke to them. The different events happened on the way to the cross, and those are the stations of the cross. More than likely, the prisoner carried the cross piece only, the horizontal part of the cross. There's no way a human could carry the vertical and the cross piece. The cross piece itself would have been extremely heavy, and historians say that the vertical part of the cross was more or less permanently implanted in the ground. Think about how much trouble that would have been to come and dig a hole and place that. The Romans left the vertical part. It was a reminder that this is where people get executed. But then the cross piece, the prisoner would have been fastened to the cross piece and lifted up onto that. We see Jesus' humanness in this, what happens here. The fact that he stumbled and fell with the cross, Matthew doesn't give us that detail, another gospel writer does. That shows us that he's weak. He's been bleeding. And it also shows complete submission. That's the divine side. Earlier he had said, I could call 12,000 soldiers to come and our angels to come and rescue him. But he's enduring this thing on his own. He refuses the wine mixed with gall. That would have deadened the pain somewhat. he did. He turned that down because he was going to face it fully aware. Matthew says when they had crucified him, and that's just Matthew's way of telling us what they did. They would have thrown down that cross piece. They would have laid him down on that cross piece, stretched out his arms as far as they would go, and driven a spike into his wrist, not the palm of his hand. The palm won't hold the body weight. The nail would pull right through between the fingers, but they would have nailed that between the bones in the wrist. That'll support you. And then they would have they would have stood him up, dropped that cross piece onto the vertical part, and then they would have nailed his ankles to the cross, bending the legs up, bent at the knees. Sometimes we see images of one ankle put over the other and one spike driven through them. Sometimes we see images of one foot on each side of the upright with a spike driven through each ankle. Just very, very recently, archaeologists found in England the skeleton of a man crucified by the Romans, and there is a fragment of a spike in his ankle. Another crucifixion victim had been found, and there was a spike in an ankle bone, but this one appears that this one was one spike in each ankle. A cruel way to die. What caused death in crucifixion? You all remember? How did a person die? Okay, you're crucified, you're hanging on a cross. If there'd been a medical exam come in and say, okay, we're going to determine the cause of death, what would the coroner or the medical examiner have said killed the victim? Yes, Nikki, suffocation. The person hung on the cross, and as they hung there, all of their weight now is on their diaphragm. And to breathe, they had to raise themselves up. And they'd hold up just enough to get a deep breath and then drop down again because the pain was agonizing. Imagine pushing against those spikes in your ankles, stiffening your legs, straightening your legs, your back scrubbing that vertical part of the cross. Yes, exactly right. That's why they bent the knees. And sometimes people would hang on the cross for days. You would be exposed to weather, and so that would be part of your cause of death. All that exposure would be terrible, but it was eventually suffocation because the person would get to the point that they couldn't raise themselves up anymore. And when they couldn't expand the diaphragm and get a breath, then they would suffocate, just hanging on their arms. That's why, and I think it's in the Gospel of John, it says they came in to break the legs of the prisoners because they wanted to get them down before the special Sabbath the next day. When you broke the legs, then they could no longer stiffen their legs and raise themselves up. They broke the legs of that prisoner on either side. When they came to Jesus, they discovered that he was already dead. Matthew doesn't give us that detail. But they died by suffocation, asphyxiation. Becky, if you would read 45 to 50.
From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit.
It's so hard to hear that. my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus had never sinned. And I think whenever he took on our sin, sin always separates us from God. And when he took on our sin, I think he felt that separation from his Father that he had never felt before. Darkness, the temple veil tearing. The centurion said, surely he was the Son of God. All these things are happening in his death that make people sit up and take notice. Becky, if you would, go to Psalm 22 now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another reason why, yes, Jesus is feeling separation from God, but Jesus knew this psalm. There's no doubt about it. He knew this psalm. If you would read verse 1 and then read verses 14 through 18.
Verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? Then 14 through 18. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted away within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth, and you lay me in the dust of death. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men have encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing.
Now, Matthew didn't tell about that, but other Gospels do, that each of them took an article of clothing. There were 5 articles. The 5th was the undergarment, and it was expensive. It was made without a hem. Without a seam. It was a single piece. And the soldier said, let's not divide this. Let's cast lots and see who gets the 5th piece. I guess the centurion wasn't taking any of the clothing. But Jesus remembers. Psalm 22 is looking forward to someone who's crucified. Crucifixion didn't take place in the Old Testament, but you can't read that and not think of the crucifixion. And I think Jesus knew Psalm 22, and I think he, when it says things like, I can count all my bones, there's the agony that it's like his bones are hurting because of the way he feels on the cross. All of that he did to save us. It's painful for us to hear. It's also beautiful knowing that God did that because God loves us. The tomb, Jesus was taken down that day before the sun set, because when the sun sets, the new day begins, and it was a special Sabbath. They rushed to get the body down, and Matthew tells us that they placed him in a tomb, and because they were concerned, the Jewish leaders were concerned that the apostles would come and steal the body and say that Jesus had risen from the dead, which is what he had said that he would do. They had a huge stone rolled in front of it. Putting a stone in front of a tomb was common practice, not so much to keep the body from being stolen, but because there was an odor, and it was their way of covering the body. So they would roll a stone in its place in front, and then they asked, and it was granted that the entrance be sealed. And what that probably means is they took mortar, like you would use laying bricks. They probably took mortar and went all the way around that stone to seal it up so that it can't be taken away. And they put a guard of soldiers at the tomb so that they could prevent anyone coming and trying to tamper with it or take it away. Matthew goes to great lengths to tell us that everything was there to make sure that that body couldn't be taken by human beings, because he wants us to get the real impact of what we're going to read in Matthew 28, the Easter story. I always say when I teach any of the Gospels and I cover the crucifixion, I don't want to stop there. It's almost like I want to go. I won't do it, but it's like I want to go until 9 o'clock tonight and include the resurrection, because it's so sad to end with the crucifixion. It's like on Holy Week at Good Friday. We leave the church, all of us in our churches, we leave on Good Friday sad and down, and knowing that it's the day our Lord gave his life, and we long to get to Easter. It'll come, and we'll do Matthew 28, the Easter story and the Great Commission next Thursday night. So I hope to see you all then. Thanks for being on with us tonight. Have a good night. God bless.